Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the summit. We're talking about chronic inflammation, really the root cause of chronic disease. And we're going to talk a lot about the microbiome in this interview. We're going to talk about Candida overgrowth and how that can impact our gut and drive up brain inflammation. So we have got an expert on Candida and the microbiome, Donna Gates, and she is an international best-selling author of The Body Ecology Diet, Recovering Your Health and Rebuilding Your Immunity, and The Body Ecology Guide to Growing Younger, Anti-Aging Wisdom for Every Generation. For the last 25 years, she's been on a mission to change the way the world eats. Her first book, The Body Ecology Diet, which I read back in 2005, it was while I was in graduate school, and it was very pinnacle in my health journey and really revolutionizing my own health. And so this book introduced the world to a sugar-free, gluten-free, casein-free, and probiotic-rich diet and a way of life that is now followed by tens of thousands of people around the world. And this book is the first book that I really read about things like stevia, which most of the people that are listening here are using probably. It was kind of the first book, I think, that really touched on that. So it was really a revolutionary book in the natural health world. And so it's an honor to have Donna on this summit. So Donna, welcome.
Thank you so much, David, for even asking me to be on the summit. And when you said I could talk about anything I wanted, I was really excited. And by the way, I just want you to know I've been following your work for years because I'm so impressed with the quality of the information and the newsletters and your infographics. I guess that's what they're called.
Yeah.
Beautiful artwork on your articles and very, they really educate people well. So you're a real master, and I'm very grateful that you asked me to do this.
Well, thank you so much, Donna. That's really an honor. I didn't know that you were following my work, so I appreciate that. Great minds think alike, and we all grow together, right? So that's really what it's about. So we're going to talk a little bit about Candida. And I know in your original book, Body Ecology Diet, you really dove deep on Candida. This is something you've studied for a long time. Many people have heard about it, but let's talk about what Candida is, how it impacts our body, how it can drive up inflammation in our system.
Well, first of all, David, even though Dr. William Crook years ago with his partner, Orient Trust, developed, they came out into the world, Dr. Crook especially, and he had written a book called The Yeast Connection. And previous to that, I had candidiasis. I went to a well-meaning dermatologist when I was 15, started on antibiotics, used them for years to have clear skin. He put me on birth control pills were incredibly way too much. Many of the women who took that dosage died of breast cancer and all. So I that was my journey, in a sense, to developing candidiasis. And that is the path that many, many women take all over the world. They use antibiotics, they get on the birth control pill, and they end up with candidiasis, and they don't even know it. So I knew something was wrong with me, had no idea what, and I started on this long journey trying everything you could do. And I won't even go into that. But when I met Dr. Crook, he said to me, we had this great conversation at the Natural Products Expo. He was launching his book, and I got to sit with him outside for a while. And he said, we don't think there's an answer to this, that there's a cure for it. And I thought, I think there's a cure for everything. I'm going to go find it. And that's how I started drawing all these people to me with candidiasis and teaching about it, and then developing the diet. And then I wrote that book, which took 4 years to do, and put it out there. And the Body Ecology Diet book really is a diet for candidiasis. But Body Ecology is bigger than that. It's based on 7 universal principles. And, people, no matter what they have, they always benefit on that diet. And you'll soon see why. The candidiasis is a huge issue. And I think people are, even your most educated and expert clinicians that are helping people are just totally unaware of candidiasis and what it is and what it does and how pervasive it is. So I recently had a great doctor who treats mold. He told me that almost everybody who comes to him does an organic acid test, and he sees a Rabinose elevated on every test. And he's discounted it. He's decided it's false because everybody has it. But everybody does have it. And so I'd really like to, hopefully that becomes clear to everybody. I actually created a PowerPoint, which I'd like to share in a minute, but I did want to say something because this is a summit about inflammation, obviously, chronic inflammation, which is an extremely important topic, especially it's very front and center in people's minds today. Healthcare practitioners are really into inflammation and chronic inflammation. So Candida is playing a major role in lifelong chronic inflammation, and it affects the brain. So that I want to point out. I'm going to make that very clear. But, David Perlmutter wrote a book called Brainwash. And I learned something important when I read the book. So basically what he's saying is that if you have brain inflammation, you can do an MRI and scan that person's brain, and you will notice that there's a disconnect between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, that part of the brain. So the prefrontal cortex, I definitely talk too fast. I get too excited. So the prefrontal cortex, it's the reasoning part of your brain. It says, right now it's telling me to slow down and not talk so fast. But it's the part of your brain that has empathy, that thinks of other people, that for example, let's say you're sitting on an airplane and it's about to take off, and this thought that the plane might crash pops in your mind. And then the prefrontal cortex says, no, it's not. Most planes never crash. Millions of people travel every day and nobody crashes. So that's your reasoning mind controlling basically your fearful part. The amygdala is about fear. It's a very selfish, narcissistic part of the brain. It's where anger, people get very angry. You see a whole lot of that in the world right now. Like people are really functioning out of their amygdala, and they're not even, the prefrontal cortex isn't working. Okay, so this is what David Perlmutter said that I think is so important for people to understand. If you have inflammation in your brain for whatever reason, there's a disconnect between these two parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So you're not thinking straight. You're impulsive, for example. And let's say, and he said, and I totally agree with this, because for years I've thought, why do we provide people all this amazing information? It's out there. You know that very well. And I've been putting it out there for decades. And so why is the whole world not doing it? Even when I work with families with autism, I really had the answers. And we got a whole bunch of kids well for the first time ever. And so you'd think people would be flocking to the door for answers. But so I'd say, why don't we have willpower to do these things? Why can't we lose weight? Why can't we stay on a good, healthy diet before we get pregnant, or age, or eat so we age well? Why? And so this is an important explanation, because that amygdala, that disconnect between these two parts of the brain, are functioning when there's chronic inflammation in the brain. So I think that's something really important for people to ponder on. I think that in these summits, especially right now, because, a lot of the information that we're trying to put out in the internet is being censored for all of us. So, these summits are going to maybe be one of the last places to get the best information. But, so many times you need to hear these more than one time, because, you might say, okay, got that, but you don't really have the time to think it through.
The reality is that so many people, we are very hyper vigilant, and anxiety is through the roof, and, we're reactive and irritable, and a lot of those types of things, when it's kind of this obsessive type of mentality that we're not able to control those emotions. That is a sign of brain inflammation. I've always said that if we can really clean up people's metabolic health and get inflammation down, that honestly will significantly reduce domestic violence, child abuse, right? I mean, the worst things in the world will all reduce significantly if we can get inflammation under control, because people can use that frontal lobe. So this is really, really key. And they'll realize if you tap into that frontal lobe, you realize, I'm frustrated about this, but it's not worth being violent, right? I need to shut it down, right?
And that's if your prefrontal cortex is able to shut it down. But what David says is that
That brain inflammation,
stopping it. Brain inflammation, all this, stress, not sleeping well. That's playing a huge role, all of that. And so we are not able to connect. Some of us are obviously better at it, but some aren't. So, but that willpower thing is really important too. Like a lot of people think, what's wrong with me? I've decided I'm going to do this. And 3 days later, I'm already off in the wrong direction. And so then we blame ourselves and we're not thinking about brain inflammation causing a lack of willpower. So I think that's a really important thing that he brought out. I think that's the main message of his whole entire book, if people want to read it. So I have something important to add to what you just said. I was going to say it at the end, but maybe I should say it now. So, another thing too is that neurotransmitters are made in the brain. They're used in the brain. And then there's a whole bunch of all the neurotransmitters are made in the gut and they're used throughout the whole body. But so the candida that we're going to be talking about actually affects neurotransmitters. And then that affects our mood. Serotonin, for example, look at all the anxiety and the depression. These neurotransmitters are really harmed by brain inflammation. And I just want to give you an example of just one example. So let's say you have candidiasis in your body. And this, by the way, happens with autistic kids all the time. So there's an amino acid tryptophan that goes on down this pathway into, serotonin 5-HTP, ultimately into melatonin, so we can fall asleep. Mm-hmm. And so that's one that's the tryptophan pathway. It can go another direction, though, down the chirorenin pathway and ultimately end up as quinolinic acid. Mm-hmm. And because I've been able to, fortunately, I'll use this example. I had a little boy, his dad called me from, I think, Ireland or Scotland years ago, and they never slept because they never slept. I mean, he was wired and he was up all night long and everything. And so they had done an organic acid test and he was on nystatin. And then they did another organic acid test. And the first one showed he had high quinolinic acid. But when he was on nystatin, he didn't have high quinolinic acid because the nystatin was suppressing the candida infection. But then they decided to take him off after several months because it doesn't cure. Nystatin doesn't cure. It only suppresses. So they took him off and another organic acid test came along and it was high again.
Yeah. So, and again, quinolinic acid is that marker of brain inflammation that you can find on an organic acid or urine test that you can do at home. Yep.
I mean, you can take it home and do it. I guess you could do it in your doctor's office. But I personally use Great Plains.
Yeah, that's what I like to use too. My team uses that.
Perfect. Okay, so just to go into that a little bit more. So let's say that this pathway is screwed up. The tryptophan to serotonin and melatonin pathway is screwed up, and it goes the wrong way. Well, then let's see. It's you don't sleep well. So that's one factor because you'll be depressed. Yeah. I actually made all these long notes.
Because it's blocking your ability to produce serotonin and convert into melatonin. So you're not getting that key sleep hormone. And melatonin really helps detoxify and de-inflame the brain. So, if you're not getting melatonin, you're also not going to be able to detox the brain.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. So I wrote these notes down about quinolinic acid, so I'd remember to say them. It's affecting the hippocampus part of the brain, and that's your long-term memory. So you're going to you're going to feel like, gosh, my brain's not working. I've got Alzheimer's or something. And it also affects spatial processing. It increases glutamate and free radicals in the brain. The quinolinic acid does. There's a substantial increase of the tau protein, which you'll find in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and so on, dementia. And it also decreases glutathione in the brain, which is a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. And then, so it causes cell death, which is also a big deal. And then, so if you have yeast in the gut, you are going to, which you can see on the organic acid test, yeast and mold and so on, you're going to have LPS. And the LPS is actually inducing the quinolinic acid. So that's another factor. It's coming from the gut. And, often the problem is in the gut. You have systemic candidiasis, yes, throughout the body, but it's also in the gut. Maybe that's where it always starts too. So what was interesting, you're going to have increased locomotion. So this little boy I was telling you about, he was like so hyperactive, and you're going to, and it's especially persistent, that locomotion, especially persistent at night. So these parents try to go to sleep, and they've got a little boy who's up all night long, super hyperactive. I told him, suggested what to do and put him on the diet. And on 6 weeks later, he called me back, and they were so grateful because finally they had their first night sleep. So that's because we're dealing with the infection that's causing, this inflammation. So anyway, let me share my screen because I try to put things in a PowerPoint so I could remember to say it. Well, so as I just said, Candida can be systemic, running throughout the whole entire body. With cancer, you will always find it systemic, diabetes, all these conditions. When they do autopsies, Candida is always present, always. And, but candidiasis can be in local areas, like very commonly in the ears, sinus, the vagina, the gut, and the skin. Probably the most common places we see it. And so what is it? Well, basically it's a member of the fungus family. It isn't fungus. It's its own special species, but mold is also in that category, but mold and Candida are not the same. I just wanted to clear that up because people don't understand when you say, well, it's a fungus. Well, mold is a fungus too, but they're two separate things. And so it's naturally present in the gut. It's very easily killed by antibiotics, but by stress. There's just a lot of things we're doing today, especially a bad diet. So we kill the good bacteria, and then yeast is much more hardy, and it grows up and dominates the environment. It causes inflammation on the gut wall, makes it very permeable, and then it can move on through into the body and become systemic. So it's found everywhere. And even though they don't really see yeast in the brain, they definitely see yeast toxins in the brain. So what are some of the causes? Well, a high sugar diet. This is a really interesting thing I discovered when I was working with kids with autism, because, their mother may have one child with autism, but she's afraid to have another one. And so, helping them become pregnant and feeling like it's really safe, staying on the diet during the pregnancy was really important to do. But when a woman becomes pregnant, her estrogen goes up. We'll see what that does. And then her progesterone goes up. And then the yeast becomes an acute infection because she's already got it in her body. And maybe she's got it kind of under control, but maybe not. And so now it becomes very acute. And so that acute infection is actually passed on to the baby. So that's a really important thing to understand. I think all women, in part of their preparation for pregnancy, must be on an anti-Candida diet. They must eliminate sugar and do all the things I'm about to explain so they don't pass it on to their child, or they will pass it on no matter what, even if they are eating right because of that progesterone and estrogen feeding. But you can throw it off right away. And that's what we've been teaching for years. Establish that microbiome. Give the baby even juice of fermented vegetables, just dilute it, or of the coconut kefir. Put a little bit of good bacteria in there, give them Infantis. Ensure that microbiome is set into place, because that's going to be how the baby's going to throw off that infection. And it's well worth doing that, because you're talking about advanced brain development. They grow prettier, more beautiful children. They're happy children. That's one thing all of our parents say, is that other parents stop them and say, he's so focused. And, they're in like guitar class, or what do you call it? The little babies are all trying to play this little tiny guitar. And the one child on the body culture diet that is eating right, basically has that healthy microbiome, is really kind of focused, where the rest of them are looking all around the room. So there's a significant a reason for doing this, but also you have to do it to throw off this infection. Now, so if your immune system is weak, that's going to let the candidiasis flourish. Stress, of course, does. The birth control fuels it. If a person's estrogen dominant, because they're, well, around by the mid 40s, women begin to, the first hormone that drops in women, or it could even be low in a teenager, the first hormone that drops really is progesterone. Then she becomes estrogen dominant. That's also causing the yeast to flare up. So if they're taking antibiotics or also steroids, this is important too, steroids. I'm going to tie this into the long haulers and COVID in a little while. So estrogen dominance is something men can have too. And, the way we eat and all can create estrogen dominance. So, and then a whole lot of people drink alcohol, and that's really bad. Now, you sort of tend to think this problem is a woman's problem, but there's absolutely an issue with men. And they'll have toenail fungus or jock itch. I see a lot of young men, scratching their jock. And then I think, oh, it's definitely got yeast. And should I tell them? Should I bring it up? They have no clue whatsoever. And then if they're in a sexual relationship, they're passing it back and forth. So it's not going to go away. It's not a good thing. But with babies, signs of it when they're born is cradle cap. That's because their yeast deplete the body of biotin. It also depletes the body of taurine, but the lack of biotin causes cradle cap and causes dandruff. So those are some things that show up in babies: cradle cap, thrush in the mouth, and then lots of men have jock itch and dandruff. So one of the things I like for people to understand is that Candida causes significant DNA damage. Now, I've been into genes for a while and looking at people's genes and, helping them get healthier by looking at nutritional genomics, for example. Well, what people don't realize is that when we do bad things or we have infections in the body, we are damaging our DNA. That's why we age. And that is why we develop cancer. In functional medicine, we're always saying, well, what's behind that? What's behind that? Let's get to the root cause here. DNA damage is getting to the root cause. And that's exactly what Candida and mold and parasites that we all have down in our gut, they are causing that DNA damage. Toxins in the food we're eating or that we're breathing in the water and all, they're causing DNA damage. And so the cells will die or they'll become mutants, and that's how we get the cancer. Now, I mentioned before alcohol. Okay, so one of the things so as I mentioned, the yeast don't get in the brain, but they are secreting a couple of really nasty toxins that do get into the brain. One of them is acetaldehyde. And a lot of people are aware that, they drink alcohol, it converts into acetaldehyde. And if we've got the right genes, we can turn that into something harmless, or, it doesn't stay as acetaldehyde. It becomes, so ethanol becomes acetaldehyde, and then we break that down and then, gets out of our body. But so alcohol is creating acetaldehyde. Chronic brain inflammation is what comes from the alcohol, the acetaldehyde. What is it doing? Well, it's literally creating brain inflammation. So if you're drinking, you've just created a whole bunch of inflammation in your brain, and that's why you're behaving weird. It literally disconnects the prefrontal cortex from the amygdala that I explained in the beginning. So don't drink. It's really, really bad, and it feeds yeast. Now, the other really nasty toxin is called gliotoxin. It's affecting the brain, but more than that, it's suppressing the immune system. And mold produces gliotoxin also. Only yeast produce the acetaldehyde, but the mold produce the aspergillus mold.
So the Candida will produce the acetaldehyde and the gliotoxin, right?
Yeah. And
when you have that Candida overgrowth, it's almost like, especially if you have leaky gut and Candida overgrowth, it's almost like a form of alcohol poisoning that can be affecting your brain.
That's funny because years ago, they started arresting people in Japan who were drunk seriously drunk. They were like, couldn't even function to get home and all. But then they found out that they didn't not necessarily have that much alcohol to drink. They just had serious yeast infections. Now, so much to say about this, but this suppression of the immune system is serious, because if you're trying to overcome the yeast infection, you can't. The yeast infection is very, very clever at staying alive. They do everything they can to make your blood acidic and suppress your immune system. They change forms so the immune system can't see it. So going back to what Dr. Crook said, we don't think there's a cure for this. I've come full circle, and there's not a cure for this. You can control it as best you can. So anyway, we do have these. So we're talking about DNA damage. Well, we have these genes that are called DNA repair genes, but they don't work very well. There's 169 of them, but there's lots of reasons that they don't work. Like, for example, when the immune system's weak, if you've got this chronic inflammation in your body and in your brain, your DNA can't repair itself. And so, so everybody talks about toxins like mercury and pesticides and all, but I have been for years really focused on the toxins that we naturally make, the endogenous toxins, and there's so many of them. A systemic yeast infection, the gliotoxin and the acetaldehyde, these are serious toxins that we're producing inside the body called endogenous toxins. To me, they're way worse than all the other toxins out there. And so, here's an example. Some of them are called superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, ammonia. And also there are genes that help negate superoxide, negate hydrogen peroxide, negate ammonia. Ammonia is made in the ATP cycle, and it's also made in what's called the CBS cycle, turning into glutathione. But when you've got variants along the way in any of these genes, you're not repairing your DNA. So when the cell's real damaged, it becomes senescent. It's one thing it can do is become senescent. So it just hangs out there and it's toxic and not doing anything good. Or it can commit suicide, which is great. Apoptosis, we want to get rid of it. Or it can become a tumor with this unregulated cell growth. So these DNA repair genes are important, but they're not working for us. And what do they do? Well, this is one of the most famous DNA repair genes called SIRT, the SIRT genes. So there's 7 of them. So SIRT1, SIRT3, those 2 are really especially researched for aging. But they're regulators. They regulate aging, calorie restriction, and time-restricted feeding help them work better. They regulate, apoptosis, where the cell just dies. They regulate inflammation. These genes really have to work. They regulate the immune response. They control our circadian rhythm. They're controlling all the clocks that are in every cell in the body, including the master clock in the brain, which isn't going to work right if you've got brain inflammation. They control how the cells respond to stress. And they respond to, so 2 good things for them is NAD and resveratrol. And so I a lot of times tell people, for one of the really good supplements to take is niacinamide. 2-3 times a day are going to help these genes. So this is information on how to increase the sirtuins. They found that the polyphenols that you get in your bitter vegetables, olive oil, dark chocolate, curcumin, ginger, ginseng, and dark berries are help the sirtuins work better. And coffee and tea too. They have polyphenols. And so, all foods have a front and a back. Like chocolate is super high in oxalates, and I don't recommend that to most people. I'm going to tell you something in a minute about oxalates, but so all foods have a front and a back side. But anyway, curcumin is a really great supplement to take. It modulates these sirtuins. And so curcumin, DHA, zinc, melatonin, NAD plus, which is that. Those are good supplements to take. I just put a really good link to a great article that's out on the internet that goes into, if you want to know more about sirtuins and you're a practitioner, you should know more about them. this is a good website to go to. Now, can it be cured? I already said no, not can be cured, but you can treat. You have to treat it, and you can bring it under control. You're managing it, but you have to be real conscientious about it, because at any moment, the yeast can go from a sort of a low level in your body to flare up and become totally controlling everything. So diet is absolutely key, and you have to build the immune system. The diet's going to help you rebuild the immune system. The diet's going to also take out anti-inflammatory foods, sugars that are, feeding the yeast. And so if you're going to rebuild the immune system, it's about sleep, it's about controlling stress, and it's about having a healthy gut. Diet, again, is absolutely essential. You cannot possibly even begin to have the slightest little improvement in your candidiasis if you aren't on an antifungal diet, which is what body ecology is. So here's something else that I want to mention. Obviously, body ecology is low sugar. It's a probiotic diet. So it's got those healthy fermented foods that are going to put bacteria back in the gut and build the immune system. But yeast produce oxalates. Now, more and more people, thank God, are finally talking about oxalates. It's a huge problem in the autism community, and we recognized that years ago. These kids are so sensitive to oxalates, but at first people didn't quite understand why. But then eventually it was understood that yeast produce oxalates. They have an enzyme that take collagen and they make oxalates out of that. And then also they're just cranking out these oxalates 24/7. And oxalates are dangerous. They are found in plants, only in plants, not in animal proteins. They're in the plants. They're like tiny little shards, microscopic shards of glass. They're in there so that the insects won't eat all the plants. So we have them to eat. But there's a microbe in our gut that nature puts there called Oxalobacter formigenes, and his only job is to sit there and eat oxalates in those plant foods. But if you've taken antibiotics, he's gone permanently forever. He doesn't ever come back. And so he's not there eating the oxalates. So they get in to, so the oxalates along with the yeast are causing all this inflammation in the gut, causing an inflamed and permeable gut lining. So these oxalates get into the body and they cause havoc everywhere. They cause I know we don't have time for that, but please, people, look into oxalates. It's so critical. And people right now are eating all these foods that are super high in oxalates. So I always tell people, body ecology is also a diet that's very mindful of oxalates, and we don't eat the high oxalate foods. So those would be potatoes, sweet potatoes. Swiss chard and spinach are incredibly off the charts high. Cashews, almonds. Look at all the people eating. The kids did this. The moms would make them a lot of almond flour. They go on the SCD and the GAPS diet, but they still wanted cookies and pancakes and all. So they make them out of almond flour. And then the kids got so sick. I mean, oxalates caused pain. And they literally had some kids rip their eyes out from the pain in their eyes. I know when I discovered that I was sensitive to oxalates, I had a yeast infection for many, many years. And so I know that it can be reactivated very easily. I know not to eat high oxalate foods. Like I'm pretty aware of it because I know the danger. But if I do eat high oxalate foods, which I don't, I actually get eye pain. And then, but what I did discover, it took me a while to figure this out because I get this eye pain. And I thought, well, I didn't eat any high oxalate foods today. But I was taking supplements that were maybe good for killing yeast, like black seed oil, for example, or a lot of the Chinese herbs that are really good for building energy, helping with adrenal fatigue and all. They are very, very high in oxalates. And I love the concept, but you have to alter everything if you have yeast, at least for a while. And then have small amounts. So I also think that the ideal diet is mindful of the high histamine foods and you eliminate those too. So yeast, when they're in your body, take certain amino acids and they turn, for example, arginine and ornithine, which are really important for nitric oxide. They're important for growth hormone and everything, but they turn those amino acids, if they're in the gut, into a nasty substance called putrescine. And it's another bioagenic amine, like histamine is, by the way, putrescine is. And then also they take the tryptophan that we're eating in our food and they make something called indican. And that's not so bad, but it is a marker of poor protein digestion. So you have to eat, the diet has to be very mineral rich, very alkalizing. You want to eat your cruciferous vegetables because they're going to help control that estrogen that's going to be too high because the yeast are producing it. So I've been really out there I know carnivore is popular and a lot of people eating a lot of meat. They feel better on it maybe, but you really need to have a diet for numerous reasons that does introduce these healthy plants and keeping the vegetables, 80% vegetables, 20% animal protein. So we don't do real high protein in body ecology. And so not with yeast, not with mold in your gut or in your body, because they're converting these amino acids into these toxic byproducts. So carnivore, I don't quite understand how people are getting by with carnivore. No, the animal protein is not feeding the yeast like sugar is, but I feel like in time there's going to be a price to be paid, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Time restricted feeding is really important. So I tell people, don't, like me, I have an 8-hour feeding window, which isn't very hard to do. I don't have an appetite in the morning. Maybe I did once, I don't now, and I don't think I ever did really. So I won't get hungry till 11:30, 12, maybe even 1 if I'm real busy. And then I'm going to finish eating by 8 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So that's an 8-hour feeding window. And that's ideal because the rest of the time you're practicing time restricted feeding. And, I have one large meal a day. I think that's a good idea, a lighter meal at dinner time. And if you're for your protein, tend to have it midday before 2 o'clock because you're going to sleep better at night. So you know how extremely, what a big problem histamine is right now. Like everybody is talking about histamine and they're going on these low histamine diets and they can't eat anything, which is not good, but it is a major source of inflammation. So I wanted to just say something about that. There's an enzyme in our gut called the DAO enzyme, and it isn't working for our people. Why? Because candidiasis suppresses this enzyme. So it can't degrade the histamine. And also there's there's a gene called AOC1. That's the gene that produces the DAO enzyme. If you've got high levels of estrogen, which you're going to with Candida, that high estrogen actually suppresses the DAO enzyme, and Candida is suppressing it too. So that's something people need to know about if they're trying to avoid these high histamine foods and they're not dealing with this, addressing the candida in the gut. They're never going to get, I don't care how long they're going to stay in a high histamine diet, they'll never get healthy. So now another thing too is a lot of people are overweight. They are fat. They have fat cells. I know that's supposed to be ugly to say people are fat, but it is the fat cells that are producing estrogen also. Yeah. And then believe it or not, this is something I was really surprised to learn. Coffee suppresses this enzyme. So if you're going to drink coffee, have it on an empty stomach. Maybe it's the first, after you drink, get up in the morning and drink water and a lot of minerals and get your body more alkalized. Maybe have a little apple cider vinegar in the water, but hydrate and alkalize, then have the coffee.
Donna, is it the caffeine in the coffee, or is it the polyphenols, or
no? It's the caffeine.
It's
It's
caffeine.
caffeine.
Okay. So yeah, caffeine suppresses
Probably
it.
should change that slide to David and say caffeine, but because you
So
get caffeine
possibly
in
like a
sugar.
decaf or a lower like some brands you
Yeah,
can get like a
yeah,
lower caffeine amount
that's a
might
good
work better.
point. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for saying that.
And also with coffee, it's important to consider mold because a lot of coffee has mycotoxins too. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. I know Dave Asprey, his
yeah,
coffee, he prides himself, but Ben Greenfield's got a mold-free one too. That's what you need
yeah.
to do. And then there's a gene called CYP, which means it's in the liver, and it's CYP1A2. So I actually have a copy of that gene, and people like me, and there's lots of us, we break the caffeine down very slowly. So you want to have your coffee because it does have some benefits. Lots of research showing that some coffee is good. You don't want to have coffee
Yeah.
when you're pregnant. It's too stimulating to the baby. And you may feel terrible on coffee, so just avoid it. But if you love the taste
Yeah.
and it's a habit, you can tell if you stay wired long after you drank some.
Yeah, Donna, I
Because
found
that's
for me,
great.
I wore a continuous blood glucose monitor. And
Oh, that's so smart.
yeah, and I noticed that 50 milligrams of coffee or of caffeine I do
Mhm.
great with. I thrive. But if I have like 100 milligrams, so the average cup of
What?
coffee that most people are
Yeah.
drinking is like 150, 200 milligrams. So if I have 50, that's like the sweet spot for me. But when I had more than that, my blood sugar was way up and I had like more
Mm.
cravings and things like that. So
Are
sometimes,
you saying, David, you're saying just a half a cup then? You can't even drink a full cup?
yeah.
Or
So exactly. So, basically, if I do a low, like about a half a cup and I water it down, so to make it
Mhm.
like a full cup. But yeah, that seems to work best for me. It's
Mhm.
like a sweet spot for me.
I wonder if you'd try this, like, oat milk. It's very creamy, but it's dairy free. I
Mhm.
wonder if you, instead of watering it down, you actually put in some oat milk, see what that does. I'm curious. The other thing I often tell people is take theanine with a coffee.
You
Theanine's
know what
in
I do
green
is I
tea.
take magnesium. Yeah, actually have put magnesium L-threonate actually in my coffee, and that seems to
Oh,
work
I
really well
love
too.
that.
Yeah, yeah. But
You
you're
know
right.
what?
Theanine would be
That's
good too.
Would you remember at the end? Because I have a slide on supplements, and theanine and
Yeah,
L-threonate should definitely be on that slide.
yeah, yeah. We'll
I
talk about
forgot to
that. Yeah.
mention that I was making this. I got up at 6:30 to do this. So anyway, there's parasites. There's a parasite that's really
Yeah.
common. It's called Blastocystis hominis,
Hmm.
and it disables nitric oxide. And we really need nitric oxide. It's a very important for a healthy gut. It's really important for a healthy immune system. And that particular common parasite that we can find in our gut is actually breaking down the arginine, so it can't make nitric oxide. And then you get gut permeability, and you have a histamine reaction. So Blastocystis hominis causes a histamine problem. So check for, if you're dealing with histamine problems and you can't seem to get over it, check for Candida, check for mold, check for Blastocystis hominis. And I think even oats does Blastocystis hominis, isn't it, David? I think that's
The oat does not test for Blastocystis hominis, but you can get like a GI map stool analysis. Great
maybe
test, a
that's
PCR test. It will look for the
mhm.
genetic material of Blastocystis hominis. And you're right, I see that often. It's very common.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for adding that. Now, there's another gene related to histamine called HNMT. So there's two histamine genes, so DAO in the gut. Well, actually, the genes, there's DAO enzyme, but the gene has actually got a different name, AOC1. And the reason I did that is there is another DAO gene, but that gene is about bipolar and schizophrenia, and so they changed the name of this particular gene to AOC1. So there are two to look at to see if you are at risk for producing more histamine, and that the one that is more about histamine inside the cell in the body is called HNMT. If you're checking your DNA, your 23andMe or something, or I'm a big fan of Joe Cohen's his DNA kit and everything is self-decode.
Yeah.
It's real easy to find these genes if you have that particular if you get the results from that. The other thing, though, in case people have never tied in the histamine with a leaky gut, so when you have more histamine in the gut, then there's an increase in zonulin. I think everybody knows about that particular protein that opens up those tight junctions, the gut junctions, and then lets in everything bad for you, basically. So
there's also a great test with Dunwoody Labs. They have a intestinal permeability test that will actually look at your histamine to DAO ratio.
Oh, cool.
And
I didn't know that.
it's interesting. Zonulin levels, they look at all of that. So that's another.
Would you say that again? To give
it's
the
the Dunwoody Labs. I believe it's called intestinal permeability test. On my website, we just call it the histamine test because it's looking at histamine, DAO, all that kind of stuff. Usually you can tell based on symptoms, right? If you're eating higher histamine foods, that includes a lot of healthy foods like even bone broth and fermented foods, and you just don't feel good. Like normally you drink bone broth, you eat sauerkraut, you should feel great, right? Those are really healthy foods. But if you're not metabolizing that histamine well, you might feel bad. You might have a headache. You might have hives, just feel worse in general.
Yeah, and avocado, which
avocado, yeah, exactly.
There's so many. So it's really important for people to look at the foods that are high in histamine. I think avoid those initially while you're working on getting your gut back into health. Well, David, can they take that test on your website? Can they come to you?
Yeah. So they can order it off my website. If you just go to the lab testing area and you look for like histamine and test, or if you look up my article on histamine intolerance, it's in there. And you can order it. Cool. And basically they send you a kit and then you just go and you take that to LabCorp and they'll draw your blood.
Wow, yep. Great. I didn't know that. That's super great. And so the one thing I do say though about you said fermented foods. Fermented foods are also, everybody says don't eat them if you have SIBO or SIFO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, small intestinal fungal overgrowth. Don't eat fermented foods. But there's a big difference between certain fermented foods and the one I do think is safe to eat, and the only one I think is safe to eat. And so you wouldn't want to have kombucha, you wouldn't want to have wine, you wouldn't have beer and all, because they're very live with fermented yeast, and then the body already has too much yeast and goes nuts when you eat those foods. It creates a strong autoimmune reaction. But also, even we saw these great probiotic liquids that are great for most everybody, but not until if someone has SIBO or SIFO, get that under control, get rid of that bacteria up in the small intestine, and then absolutely introduce the healthy fermented foods, because you want a healthy colon so you don't constantly deal with that overgrowth. It'll keep coming back over and over and over again until you've reestablished that microbiome, and you have, which they're very important to do. Now, so for years, I've been telling people eat fermented vegetables. And if you use our starter, when you're making them, they're very rich in plantarum, and plantarum's job is to degrade histamine. So that's a good one. Yeah. You can take plantarum as a probiotic too. You have to take a lot of it. And then and plantarum degrades oxalates. Plantarum, if you start eating it and you get a nice healthy amount in your gut and you have to take an antibiotic, most antibiotics don't destroy the plantarum, and you're not going to get that overgrowth. So, there's so much misinformation on in the website because people just don't know. Practitioners, they can't know. I mean, there's no way you can, Look, I've been doing this work for more than 25 years. So obviously I can learn a lot of stuff. And so you wouldn't expect anybody to know all that, but I'm so grateful for opportunities like this to share this information, because it soon gets out there and people, they're sharing it with each other and practicing. And it's important to know this. But so you do have to fix the gut. Yeah, absolutely. And that means you're going to remove the candida, the mold, the bacteria, the parasites. You really need to work with a savvy practitioner that's trained in root cause medicine. And then something that I just want to throw in there, because your practitioners will know this, there are biofilms. These yeast, all of these live in this fortress that they create for themselves. And you absolutely must dissolve that. Like we have a product called, because we're very focused on gut health, called Eco Oxyzyme. And that's what it does. dissolves the biofilm. But a lot of people that have really, really poor gut dysbiosis, we put the special form of magnesium in there to help stimulate peristaltic movement. But even then, some people are dissolving the biofilms, not moving them out, and then they start feeling bad. Well, that's where enemas come in. You want to get out that enema bucket and just rinse out what's in that colon right then and there, and you will be you're rinsing out they're unleashed, like they're out live and out in the environment. You want to rinse them out of there. So that's really important to know.
Yeah. And Donna, what are some of the key things you have in your Echo Oxyzyme? It sounds like it's got like some oxygen, maybe magnesium oxide or something like that, and some enzymes. 'Cause I know proteolytic enzymes are really good for helping break down biofilms.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's a form of magnesium that is different from the other popular one that's out there. And it's more effective, basically. So, but then I know I was rushing through this, but I want to get some of the most important things said. But so you definitely have to repair the gut lining. Absolutely. Because it's going to be really inflamed. And, in functional, like IFM and A4M, they always talk about the 5 R's. I think if you focus on just the 3 R's, that's good enough. And so for me, they're remove the problem makers, identify them and remove them. And that means just getting rid of the biofilms. Then you want to repair the gut lining. And then you've got to replace that microbiome, which means probiotics and fermented foods. But as I mentioned before, not all fermented foods are good for you. So if you want to, you must repair the gut lining, and there's some wonderful products out there. Some well-known practitioners are selling them on their website, but go looking for those. I'm in the process of creating one myself. But they will have things in them like glutamine. Our Vitality Super Green is really good at it's perfect. You want to have no more than 2,000 milligrams of glutamine, because you don't want that glutamine to convert into glutamate. Remember, we talked about earlier about the quinolinic acid. It creates a lot of glutamate, which is a cytotoxin in the brain, causing inflammation. And so glutamine, we have Vitality Super Green and has it in there. And then other really good ones for healing the gut are large arabinogalactin, marshmallow root powder, aloe vera extract, slippery elm, licorice. You'll find these commonly used in these gut repairing products. Immunolin is another excellent one that we will soon be bringing out our own take on that. And then you have the healthy vegetables. They're very, very important for healing that gut lining. And healthy fats, the right fats are important for a healthy gut lining too. So I also am, because I mentioned I'm really into nutritional genomics, I love it when I can look at somebody's genes, because I think the supplements that are really supporting those variants or SNPs are in the genes when you have a risk for something, risk for diabetes, risk for irritable bowel disease. There's a whole category of genes that tell you if you're going to be at risk for gut problems. Like, for example, one of my favorites to check is called FOOT2. And so that's the gene related to our blood sugar. So like I'm an A. So I secrete a blood sugar that's unique to A's. David, you look like an O. Are you an O?
Yeah, I'm an O positive, yeah.
Yeah, so you'll be secreting a different sugar for the O's, but it's feeding the bacteria in the gut, in the mouth, in the saliva, in the sweat, and that's where we get that's how we feed the bacteria in our skin and in our gut and in our mouth and all. Tears, another area. So it's a real important gene. If you're a new mom and you're breastfeeding and you have this gene, or your baby has this gene, you're not going to establish that really healthy microbiome at birth. Anyway, it's important to take bifidus. That is the bacteria that you need to help that gene. So for every genetic possible variant, there are always fixes for everything. So I do just want to go on record for saying I think more practitioners need to learn nutritional genomics, at least the basics. I've actually developed a program for that to teach practitioners. Like it's kind of going to first and second and third grade, because some of the training programs out there aren't complete enough, or they're not focusing on enough of the genes in a category, or Anyway, so what you do when you see the gene is super, super important. So I've been working on a great program called Butterfly Genomics. That's a training program, basically.
Cool.
Yeah, and so you really want to support these genes and the gene variants. And so there's going to be a die-off occurring when you start doing the right things, and you're going to feel lousy. And that's why I have told people for years, you need to know how to do enemas. Go to your colon therapist. If you can't afford to go, you can easily buy a Kalima board. Now, Dr. Bernard Jensen years ago created the first Kalima board, and then this company, his very good friends, also years ago, created a really nice Kalima board set, and the company is called Colenz, Colenz. It's like a $350 wonderful tool that will help you do much more cleansing than you'll get out of an enema. And I believe with all my heart that there's so many people that can't get well unless they do colon cleansing. So that's like another whole entire long talk. The supplements, let's put the ones you were going to remind me of. Theanine, L-threonate.
Right. Yeah. Magnesium, L-threonate. Yep. We talked about that a little bit. I think that was the key one. What else did we mention?
Okay. So we were talking about theanine too, but also,
L-theanine. Yep.
Yeah. So to control the Candida, kyolic garlic, to lower that acetaldehyde that's causing that brain inflammation.
Yeah.
Kyolic garlic, any one of them, they're all good. They make different, like one for cardiovascular, just get it. And take 2-3 times a day. And that's going to help.
Now, would something like activated charcoal help with that too? Or like fulvic acid or something like that?
Well, if you notice down a little ways down, I have binders.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely think you need a binder because you are going to have that die off. You want to take the binder away from other things. Like you don't want to, it won't work if you've taken it with your food. It'll bind up nutrients. So on an empty stomach or empty as possible, take the binder. I think berberine is a great supplement because it's going to help control your blood sugar, which you must do. Lots and lots of your most well-known healthcare practitioners are actually taking metformin. I love what you said, David, about getting a glucose monitor, continuous glucose. I mean, people will have to go to their doctor and get a prescription for that, but that is really enlightening because you might be eating this food that you're sure is low in sugar, but it's spiking your sugar. So it's a wonderful new tool that we have access to. Now, so still old-fashioned Palo d'Arco tea is great to drink. Yeah. And then, again, I mentioned time-restricted feeding, how critical that is to do that. And then very often doctors will see that you have candidiasis and the symptoms, and they'll put you on nystatin. Well, nystatin works in the gut, and it doesn't work throughout the body. It doesn't kill, it doesn't get rid of the Candida. It only suppresses it. So you really have to use some pretty strong botanicals along with it. Too. So practitioners, again, can help you do this. So I think I covered everything.
I thought it was also interesting with taurine as well, which is really key. It's a bile salt. It's an amino acid, plays a role in neurotransmitter formation, but also as a bile salt too. And when you have like thick, sluggish bile is an antiseptic agent in the small intestine. And so when it's not flowing well, you can have a greater tendency to have small intestinal fungal and bacterial overgrowth. So
that's a great thing to add. And taurine, if you look it up, is for the heart and for the brain. Yeah. And I have a couple of articles on my website that I think you can just Google taurine. But one of the things I discovered years ago that no one knows about, but in trying to help the kids with autism, taurine, the yeast compete for the same spot. Taurine's trying to get into the cell and the yeast come along and block it. People with yeast are deficient in taurine. So what you just said is super important for gut health and digestion of our fats. And so I'm glad you added that. Thank you.
Donna, this has been a really great presentation, just really eye-opening. And, there are a lot of good things. There's lots of things that you can do to help support these things. Talk about histamine. There's also other natural antihistamine things like vitamin C and quercetin that can also be really helpful. With oxalates, I know citrates can also help. So you can take like a magnesium potassium citrate or something like
Right.
that.
Perfect. Yeah.
How do you feel about like doing like lemon water or putting like lemon on your foods? Because lemon is a natural source of citrate, lemon and
It
lime.
is. It is.
Yeah. Do you think that
But, you know,
that can
I
help
think
with oxalate binding?
well, I think it depends again, as everything does, because if you're real sensitive to
Yeah.
histamine, you're going to
True.
react to that. I'd rather see somebody put a little bit of apple cider vinegar.
Mm,
It will do the same thing, and it helps with
cool.
oxalate binding. I had another thought too.
Yeah.
Okay, two thoughts. First of all, I'm using quercetin. If someone has the COMT gene,
Hmm.
and that gene is being expressed, which it is when you're under stress, because what that gene does is you get stressed and your dopamine goes up, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and then it stays up. It doesn't get cleared, it doesn't degrade and go back down to where you're calm.
Yeah.
So anyway, quercetin isn't good if you have that gene and you're under stress. So don't take it when you're under stress. The other thing, curcumin is fantastic for inflammation in the body. There's a new curcumin out called brain curcumin. I noticed Daniel Amin has it. I love it. I took it myself. I think everybody should take brain curcumin. And now has it too, and probably other companies. But there's the parent company that makes it, that everybody's private labeling, is Long, LONG Vita. Long. So make sure if you see that product that you flip it around and it'll say Long Vita. But those two curcumins, they're way up there at the top of the list for controlling inflammation. So,
I love curcumin and resveratrol as well. And you had mentioned that with the SIRT pathway. Resveratrol is another great supplement that works well with that. And, I also see a lot of people that are B6 deficient, and particularly if they're not, like if they have COMT or they're not metabolizing some of these neurotransmitters, zinc and zinc can help. Magnesium and B6.
Magnesium's really needed for that COMT gene.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And magnesium deficiency is so high. And so magnesium can be really, for a lot of people, that's one of the supplements they take and they like notice it within an hour. They're like, wow, that really made a difference. And so, so that can be really helpful too.
Trudy Scott always does her anxiety summit every year. And she's a big proponent of, talks a lot about GABA, but that's another important neurotransmitter that is going to be not working if you've got brain inflammation. Right. And again, the quinolinic acid producing the glutamate, there's actually a gene, GAG1. And if you have a variant there, you're not going to convert your glutamate into GABA and it gets cycled back around, goes around and around. But it's so amazingly interconnected. That's why I wanted to do the PowerPoint, because there's no way you can remember all this. You've got to kind of go back and,
it really helps having the visual. So, Donna, this has been a great presentation. Thank you so much for all your time and your energy and your expertise. We really appreciate it. Any last words of inspiration for our audience here?
Going back to what David Perlmutter said, is that if you don't have any willpower and you can't lose weight and you can't stay on the diet, it's not you. It's this brain inflammation causing this disconnect between these two parts of your brain. And one of our principles, body ecology, is based on 7 principles. And one is the principle of uniqueness, which is why I love the gene part of it. But another really important one is step by step. So you just can't do all this. You have to pick a couple of things. Some things you're already doing, thank God. That's good. You got that in place. But then I love for people to know about the step-by-step. I love for practitioners to know about it, because if they follow that, they're going to help the person get well. So the first, so it's kind of like, what do you do when you're trying to get well or get started on something? Well, first, focus on creating energy. And that is 2 things. If you're not sleeping, then you won't have energy. If you're under stress, you're not going to have energy. And so that's really, really important. And the second thing is you want to, fix the gut. So you want to have a healthy microbiome. So then go focusing on that. course, you can't sleep very well if you don't have a healthy gut. They're all kind of related, but, pick something to do because you can't do it all. Oh, you know what I'm doing? I'm wearing this really cool device. It's new. It's called an Apollo Neuro. Do you know about it, David?
I don't know.
Okay. So it was developed by these team of brilliant, neural brain people. And, they spent a long time doing it. It's so cool. You just wear this and it's got these different modes. You can, so I have an app on my phone and then I go to my Apollo Neuro app. And if it's bedtime, this is what it's most worth every penny for. You set it on sleep and it starts vibrating. And it's kind of like sound waves, but it's going into your nervous system and it totally puts you to sleep. And then if you wake up, you can, hit it again and back to sleep. So, and then over time, like in a week or two or something, you have a new pattern, like the brain's learned a new pattern. So I love this Apollo Neuro. And then also, and you can go to the website and see what, how to get it. But what I did, because I'm always a little nervous before we do these things, like I'm hoping I remember to say the right thing and I'm not talking too fast and all. And so what I do is I put it on the mode that's called focus and concentration. There's one for meditation that helps you meditate better. There's 7 different categories. Then when I wake up in the morning after sleeping well at night, then I put on the wake up one. So it's an expensive little device for $350. But if you're not sleeping, please look into it because you really have to sleep. And it's fantastic for controlling stress. So there are devices out there that you can use. It's really an amazing time to be alive. So create energy, correct digestion, and then you want to conquer the inflammation and the infections in your body, whether it's mold, candidiasis, Lyme, COVID. You got to conquer that. And so I also was going to mention something really important about COVID because all these people are getting they're the long haulers. They get infected with COVID-19, they get over it, but they're never the same for after. But this is because people don't understand candidiasis. They don't realize when they go in the hospital or their doctor, is trying to help, they're taking antibiotics and any fungals, any fungals they're using, but they're on a lot of antibiotics, really strong ones. And they are absolutely and they're on steroids. So those two things create yeast infection if you don't already have one, or they make the one you have that maybe you inherited from your mom at birth, because these kids, a lot of these long haulers are young. So it makes it really things that are really, it's not part of COVID anymore. You now have this inflammation. And of course, for sure, the symptoms are brain inflammation. They're super foggy, very tired and fatigued. So I'm hoping people really, really get it when you promote this summit, David, that how important understanding, controlling, understanding it, and then implementing the last. So they're all C's, like create energy, conquer the infections, correct digestion, cleanse out the toxins, because you have a lot of toxins and you're going to create a lot more toxins when the yeast and mold are dying off. That's where the binders come in and enemies come in. I just don't want people to feel overwhelmed. I'm sure they do at this point, but just the other part is step by step is just take little bitty bites, put that into place. But the brain inflammation, so that we have that connection between those two areas of our brain, is super important. So you have the willpower to do it. And that's all I want to say.
Super key. Well, thanks again, Donna. Guys, you can check out our website, bodyecology.com, and her great book, The Body Ecology Diet. So thanks so much again for your time, Donna. And guys, we'll see you on a future interview. Be blessed, everybody.